All right, I'm back. You probably figured out I filmed all three of these on the same day, right? You guys aren't. Anyway, I miss telling my dad jokes, so I'm gonna tell you a couple. What is orange, but sounds like a parrot? A carrot. You didn't like that one? That's okay. What's brown and sticky? A stick. Don't be weird. All right, moving on. All right, solving using the quadratic formula. So this is my favorite method. I like it because it works for any type of problem. Even a problem that can be factored, you can use a quadratic formula. If it's a problem you could use to complete the square, you could still use the quadratic formula. It's a little bit longer, which is the reason why maybe some of those other methods would be better. There's some other reasons for those other methods as well. But the quadratic formula is our one-stop shop. The one that if all else fails, you can always use the quadratic formula. So the first thing we have to do is make sure we have the quadratic formula memorized, which I have it over here still, so it's on the screen. But if you were in class, we would just listen to it over and over and over again. So I figured I'd make you listen to it at least one more time. So quadratic formula.
To solve any quadratic equation, all you need is the quadratic formula. Here's a little song to help you remember it to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel.
X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
X equals a negative b and plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Oh man, didn't you just miss that song the last week? So great to hear it again. All right, so the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's annoying, it's obnoxious, I get it, but it works. Memorize the song. When to use the quadratic formula? Anytime. Right, this will work for every quadratic equation. How to use it? Well, first thing, we need to have the problem in standard form, right? So ax squared bxc and then equal to 0. So this one is in standard form. Then we identify our a, b, and c. So a is 2, b is negative 5, c is negative 1. And then we're going to plug those into the quadratic formula. X equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root b, so negative 5 squared minus 4a c all over 2a. And I do recommend using the parentheses every time, that way you don't make the little mistakes with the positive and negative signs. So now we're going to go ahead and simplify. So negative 5 is a positive 5. Using the parentheses here helps me to remember do negative 5 times negative 5, which is a positive 25. And then negative 4 times 2 times negative 1. 2 negatives make a positive. 4 times 2 times 1 is 8. All over 2a. 2 times 2 is 4. Continue to simplify. X equals 5 plus or minus square root of 33 over 4. And then our next step in simplifying is to see if we can simplify the square root. If I take the square root of 33 and try the factor tree, the only thing I can do is 3 times 11. So I do not have any pairs, so we cannot simplify the square root of 33, so we'll leave it. And if we can't simplify that square root, we are automatically done. We'll do some other examples where we can go further than that, but this one is done. All right, example number 2. First thing I notice is it's not equal to 0, but I need it to equal 0. So I'm going to add 6x. And when I add the 6x over here, I need to make sure that since it's my b, that it goes in the middle. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2x squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. Step 2, identify a, b, and c. A equals 2, b equals 6, c equals 1. Step 3, plug them into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b, just 6, plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then the last step, simplify. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared is 36 minus 4 times 2 times 1, so that's minus 8, all over 2 times 2, which is 4. X equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 28 over 4. And some people want to try to reduce this now, divide this by 4 and make it square root of 7, but we can't do that because it's not actually 28, it's square root of 28. So don't try to reduce what's inside the square root. What we can do, however, is take the square root of 28 and do the factor tree. I can get 2 times 14, 2 times 7, and this time we do have a pair, or we have buddies, right, if you're in my class. So we can take those buddies out, but the 7 will stay inside the square root. And so I can now rewrite this as x equals negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 4. Sometimes we're done at this point, but this one we can actually go one step further, which this is the furthest we can go is one more step. And that is if I draw my little chip here, my Dorito chip, I've got negative 6, I have 2 root 7s, and I have a 4. So my 3 main numbers are all divisible by 2. We never divide the square root of 7, that stays square root of 7. But I can reduce all of these by a factor of 2. So I get x equals negative 3 plus or minus. We divide this by 2, it's 1, so 1 square root of 7. And then if we divide 4 by 2, we get 2. So our final simplified solutions are negative 3 plus or minus square root of 7 over 2. All right. Okay, next example. It is not in standard form, so we need to move the 1. All right, so I'm going to subtract 1. That will go with my c value, so I subtract 1 from the 4. 3x squared plus 2x plus 3 equals 0. Identify my A, B, and C. A is 3, B is 2, C is also 3. And then we plug them into our quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Man, I'm a good singer, right? Right, guys? No, I don't. All right, continue to simplify. Negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared, which is 4, minus, now there's no other negative, so it's going to stay minus. 4 times 3 is 12, 12 times 3 is 36, all over 2 times 3. And you might already recognize this is going to be a no solution, because as I simplify, I get square root of negative 32. What's the square root of a negative number? That's right, it's an imaginary number, which means we have no real solutions. And at this point, we are only worried about real solutions, and we do not have any for this problem. So again, anytime you get a negative square root, no solutions. All right, final 2 examples. This one right here I included, it's actually a problem that we could factor, and we'd be able to solve it pretty quick by factoring. But we can also use the quadratic formula. So it is in standard form. A is 1, B is 6, C is 8. Plug them into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over, make sure it's all over, 2a. Simplify. X equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 32 over 2 times 1, so 2, which simplifies to x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 4 over 2. And the square root of 4 is 2, right? So I can rewrite this as negative 6 plus or minus. Since the square root of 4 is a regular 2, I can change it to 2 over 2, which means we have 2 possible solutions. You could reduce it and then show both solutions, or from right here you can just write out both solutions. I have negative 6 plus 2 over 2, and our second solution is negative 6 minus 2 over 2. So this simplifies to negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2. So x equals negative 2. And then this one simplifies to negative 8 over 2, which divides to negative 4. So we ended up with 2 solutions. We got x equals negative 2 and x equals negative 4. If you end up with a perfect square here, where you can take the square root and get a regular number, that just means it was a problem that we could have factored, but the quadratic formula still gives us the 2 correct solutions. All right, last example. Not in standard form, so what do I need to do? I need to subtract 2 from both sides, which gives me 2x squared plus 8x plus 5 equals 0. Identify my A, B, and C. A equals 2. Get that out of there. B equals 8. And C equals 5. Plug them into the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then simplify. Negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 4 times 2 times 5 is 40 all over 2 times 2, which is 4. simplify some more. Negative 8 plus or minus square root of 24. And then this is the part where sometimes people start making more mistakes. But remember, we never reduce what's in the square root, but we can simplify it. So I'm going to go off to the side and I'm going to try to do the factor tree with square root 24. I get 2 times 12, 2 times 6, 2 times 3. So I have one pair of 2's, so a 2 comes to the outside. And then these are not a pair, so they multiply back together. So 2 times 3 is 6. So it ends up simplifying to 2 root 6. So I can now rewrite this as x equals negative 8 plus or minus 2 root 6 over 4. And then this is where we can look to see if we can still reduce all 3 of these terms using the Dorito chip, as one of my students started calling this last year, and I really liked it because most students understood it. If we can simplify negative 8, 2, and 4, then we can reduce it, which we can because 2 goes into all of those. So we can reduce this by a factor of 2. So negative 8 turns into negative 4. 2 turns into 1. So we have not 2 square root 6, but 1 square root of 6. And then my 4, when I divide that by 2, is 2. Again, we can't divide the square root of 6 because it's not actually 6, it's square root of 6. And we are done. Beautiful. Quadratic formula. Hope you guys had a good first week back. We want to make sure you guys are really good at this. This is a huge skill moving forward, especially in IM3. Next week we will start graphing. And a lot of it comes back to understanding the quadratic formula and standard form and solutions. So the better you understand this, the easier it's going to make what we do moving forward. But again, hope you guys are well. Appreciate you taking the time to learn this. Please make sure you're reaching out, ask some questions if you have them. And go Titans!